So I spend a lot of time on this channel talking about how to meet and attract the type of girls you want. But today I'm going to talk about something perhaps even more important, which is how to get the relationships you have with them on your terms. There are a number of different factors that are going to dictate whether you have the type of relationship you want or whether you're at the mercy of her whims, society's whims, or you just end up in a bad relationship where you have sort of a global lack of power. So I'm going to walk you through 6 factors that are very, very critical to getting the relationship you want. The first 5 are completely in your control. The 6th one is largely outside of your control, but it is going to be important. So without too much further ado, let's get into them. And the first factor I want to talk to you about is how are you conveying yourself and your life? Whenever you're interacting with someone, they're getting a sense of who you are, who you've been in the past, what types of relationships you've had in the past, how many birds fly at your head. They're getting a sense of kind of who you are and who you've been, and they're going to fill in that role. So if you're conveying yourself as this sort of rich guy who buys things for girls and leads mainly with money, you're going to be put into a particular type of relationship role. If, on the other hand, you're portraying yourself as a type of guy who's all about the experience, whether he's successful or not, that's going to convey a certain role. If you're conveying that you've had a lot of girls in your life before, she's going to assume certain things about your preferences, about what she can get away with, what she can't get away with, about what you expect from her. If you convey that you're very, very shy, she's going to assume that you're a certain type of person. If you convey yourself as very outgoing with a lot of friends, she's gonna assume that you are a particular type of person. And what this is really getting down to is this. A girl with a different guy may act in a very different way. So with one guy who's acting conservatively, she may act very, very conservatively as well in order to please him, in order to fit into that. With another guy who's very sort of like outgoing, crazy, sort of like a party guy, she may become much more spontaneous, become much more kind of like loose and free, and different things may occur there in terms of their relationship, all right? So every single thing you're doing is having an effect on her. Every single thing you're doing is telling her what you expect and what type of relationship you want. It's very, very hard to have a relationship that's not congruent with your type of guy. So if you convey yourself as this very highly structured, follow the rules, by the book kind of guy, it's going to be very hard to have a crazy, spontaneous, wild, not by the rules type of relationship, and vice versa, all right? So you want to be very cognizant of how you're conveying yourself, in particular, how you're conveying your past relationships, but how you're conveying everything about your life, because she's reading into it and she's deciding what role she wants to fill for you, right? Girls are very, very flexible. If she likes you, she's going to be very adaptable, but if you're giving her the wrong message, she's going to pick that wrong message up and go in the wrong direction. The next critical factor in what type of relationship we're going to have is how you are conveying the relationship to her. So things like when you show up and see her, do you bring flowers every single time? Do you open doors for her? Or is it a lot more casual, right? Are you inviting her on big formal dates, or are you inviting her to go do things that you normally do in your everyday life? Are you inviting her to meet your friends, or are you not inviting her to meet your friends, just having her come over and just hang out, just the two of you? Different things like that. Are you promising things? Are you indicating things like what you're gonna do together in the future, different things like that? Or are you just kind of living in the moment and taking things as they come? Okay, so all of these factors are telling her your expectations. They're telling her what type of relationship you envision having. And again, she's gonna be very malleable to that. She's gonna go along a lot with what you're leading. So there are certain girls that will resist your lead, but if you are leading in a certain direction, it's a lot more likely that you're gonna end up in that direction than not. All right, so you want to be very, very careful about that kind of stuff. And a lot of guys make these mistakes, right? They have a girl who they want to just hook up with, and they start getting very lovey-dovey and inviting her to meet their parents. They end up in a bad situation. Also, guys have situations where they want to be very intimate with a girl, and yet they never open up with her. They never actually do anything that is perceived as relationship-y, and then the girl doesn't take the relationship as seriously for quite some time. So you want to be very careful about how you are conveying the relationship, the promises you're making, even things like terms of endearment, dear, darling, baby, honey, those kind of things. It all comes together to give them an impression of what you want. And again, you're probably going to get something along the lines of what you want, or at least you're more likely to get what you want if you've conveyed it than if you haven't. And you're more likely to get what you don't want if you've conveyed it wrongly than if you are being intelligent about what you are conveying. So the first two factors I've talked about in dictating the type of relationship you're going to have and on what terms you're going to have the relationship have to do with the message you're conveying to the girl. First, your message about yourself. Second, your message about the type of relationship. This next factor has to do with how strongly your message will be heard and responded to. And so what this is who has the power in the relationship, who is dictating things, who's in control of the dynamic. And oftentimes, I would even go so far as to say most of the time, this has to do with who needs the other person more and who's less willing to walk away. Because in any kind of negotiation, right, you have to understand, you have your idea of what you want in the relationship, she has her idea of what she wants, and they might not be entirely congruent, and so it becomes a bit of a negotiation. And in any negotiation, if you can't walk away, you're in bad shape. If you can walk away, you have a lot of negotiating power. So you want to convey the fact that you can walk away, you also want to be able to walk away. And how is this done? Well, essentially it's done by having good game. This is where having technically good game really comes in, because now you're conveying non-neediness and congruence. You're conveying social proof and abundance. You're conveying the fact that you have other girls and other options, those kind of things. You're holding the frame, controlling the frame, dictating things in ways that are going to show you have power. When she gives you a shit test, you're able to handle it instead of getting reactive to it and falling into her frame. All of these things are dictating who has the power in the relationship. And this is why it's so funny, right? A lot of times you'll see guys who are like really successful at life, even celebrities, even they can get really hot girls because of those other factors, but you see the actual relationships they're in and they're browbeaten and abused by the women they have in their life. It's because they never learned game. And so yeah, maybe they got girls through some ancillary means, but they don't know how to fundamentally have power within the relationship, and they end up having to bend over backwards to whatever the girl wants. So it's absolutely critical that not only you're conveying the things you want, but you have enough power, enough kind of like oomph within the relationship to actually make sure those things become important in the relationship, as opposed to just being ignored for what she wants instead. The next absolutely critical factor in determining a relationship is, how does the relationship start? Okay, and that has to do with a lot of different things. For example, where and how did you meet? If you meet through a day game cold approach, that's going to be different a little bit than a night game cold approach. That's going to be very, very different than being introduced by a friend. It's also going to be different than if you have classes with a girl and she's gotten to know you over a period of time, or maybe you go to the same restaurant, she's a waitress and she sees you and gets a crush on you. Who knows? Those kind of factors. Also, imagine meeting someone live and in person versus meeting on a dating site. There's a different expectation of what you're both looking for, different expectation of your relationship history, those kind of things. Even from one dating site to another, you meet on Match.com versus meeting on Tinder, there are different expectations. However, even beyond where you met, one of the single biggest factors that's going to come into play is how long and through what means what happened before having sex for the first time. Okay, so for example, if you meet and so a wild and crazy night at a club, you have hook up that first night. Well, now the girl's gonna kind of know your high value, know you've already had sex, and she's gonna be worried: is he gonna call me again? Is this actually serious? Can I take him as more than just a player guy from the club? On the other hand, if you met through a friend of a friend and got to know each other over a series of several dates before having sex, now she's viewing you in a completely different light. In general, as a man, the earlier you have sex, the better off you're going to be in terms of having the ability to have different types of relationship dynamics. If you want to be extremely boyfriendy and extremely relationshipy, you can probably get away with both. But even there, because of the previous factor, i.e. who has power in the relationship, having sex earlier on is probably going to help you. Because typically, for a guy, until you've had sex, the girl's rationalizing all the reasons she hasn't had sex with you, and typically she's feeling like she's in the position of, do we have sex or not? On the other hand, once you have had sex, now the win for her is keeping you around, having a relationship with you, so that changes the dynamic dramatically. Now, that's not necessarily the case. There are times where maybe you're not having sex because you already had a previous girlfriend and she was hitting on you and you were saying no. That changed the dynamic. Or I had a friend who he was actually devoutly religious and he didn't want to have sex. And so he'd date these girls without having sex with them for a very long time, and they would chase, and they knew that they couldn't have sex with them, which made him kind of the forbidden fruit. So there are different dynamics at play here, but in general, under normal circumstances, the earlier you have sex, the more power you're going to have. And in any case, how the relationship starts determines a lot about how it's going to proceed, right? First impressions matter. First impressions create a precedent and create a set of expectations for each and every step thereafter. The next critical factor in whether you have a relationship on your terms is whether and where you put your foot down. What are your boundaries? Do you have boundaries? And how much do you stand up for them? Because all the power in the world is great. If you don't exercise it, it doesn't mean anything. All the direction in the world is great, but if someone steps over the line and you don't do anything about it, they'll continue stepping over the line again and again and again. So the question is, what are your boundaries? Do you know what your boundaries are? Have you set them? Do you uphold them? All right? And also, how do you uphold them? If you uphold them like a tyrant, if you uphold them and you get angry and vicious and forceful every time, that's not so good either. If you uphold them and yet maintain the relationship and keep things friendly, that's where you're gonna do much better. And again, this comes down a lot to having good game, right? It's frame control. Question is, can you stand up for yourself without making the other person hate you? The question is, can you change her mood, not her mind, and make her want to do the things you want instead of feeling forced and coerced to do the things you want? Because nobody wants to feel like they're in a negotiation where they're constantly losing. However, a fun, flirty interaction where they just go along with the other party sometimes is a lot more palatable, right? So part of this is deciding what are your boundaries and deciding what you absolutely won't tolerate. That's absolutely critical, right? If you'll tolerate everything, you'll end up in a very shitty place. On the other hand, you have to know how to enact your will in a positive way. You have to know how much power you have, how much you can get away with, how much you can negotiate at any given time. And that comes down partly to good game, but it also comes down to integrity and making some decisions ahead of time so that you have sort of the right precursors in the relationship. You have the right general frame established, okay? This is the one that is more of an active negotiation than any of the others. A lot of the others set the frame for this. A lot of the other ones, other factors we talked about, set the frame for whether you'll be able to put your foot down. But it is still critical that you actually do so and that you do so in the right way. So thus far I've talked about 5 different factors that are going to influence the type of relationship you have and whether it's on your terms that are largely in your control. This 6th one I'm going to talk about is largely outside of your control, but it's still very important to keep in mind, and that is sort of the girl's background and the girl's current story. So for example, let's say a girl is a virgin, it's probably going to take a little longer to sleep with her, and if you do, then she's probably going to take things a little more seriously than another girl might in a similar circumstance. Another example is, let's say you're in Vegas when you meet a girl and she's traveling from one city or traveling from another city. That situation is obviously going to play a huge part in how things are perceived, whether there's any future kind of intended in her mind when she starts having fun with you, if you hook up, that sort of thing. And so this is a huge factor that again is largely outside of your control. Now, it's not completely outside of your control, right? If you want girls that are very conservative, you could go to church to meet them or something like that. If you want girls that are very not conservative, you could go to very non-conservative places. If you don't want to meet girls on vacation, don't go to Vegas, all right? So there is some say in the matter on your part as well. But that said, when you meet a girl, you don't have a lot of say over her past, over her background, so much as you might in terms of some other factors. And why does this matter? Well, we've talked throughout kind of vaguely, we've kind of implied it but not said it, that a lot of this is a negotiation, right? A lot of it's a negotiation. You're kind of telling what you want, you're coming to it with a certain frame control, you're coming to it with power or without power, etc. And the idea is, you have a certain idea of what you want and how you'd like the relationship to be. She has a certain idea of what she wants and how she'd like the relationship to be. And there are a few different things that can happen. One is, look at these as ranges, right? So maybe your range falls within her range, like she wants the relationship from here to here, you want it from here to here, it overlaps. You're gonna have it somewhere in the overlap where it's within both of your reasonable parameters. There'll be other girls where the type of relationship you want and the type of relationship she wants are completely incompatible. And so in that case, either it's not going to happen or somebody's going to feel massively like kind of out of sorts or like they've really fallen into the other person's frame. They might even feel uncomfortable in that sort of a circumstance, all right? But whether they're falling into your frame or you're falling into their frame and where within that acceptable range they're going to fall is hugely determined by a lot of these factors I've talked about. Right? And whether a relationship's going to work at all may be determined by these factors as well. So definitely keep these things in mind. Understand this idea that it is a negotiation. However, a negotiation should not be win-lose. They should be win-win. And so my final note that I want to leave you with here is that in getting a relationship on your terms, it's important that your terms also coincide with her terms. It's important that there be some congruence and some overlap there, because you don't want a coercive, forceful kind of relationship where she's just doing all the things you want to do and it's uncomfortable for her. You obviously also don't want the other, which is where you're completely in her frame and doing things that you hate and hating the relationship itself, all right? So you want that overlap, you want that win-win, and then from there, you want to negotiate to the best of your ability to have the relationship that's going to make you the absolute happiest, and then by virtue of that, by you being happier, be as rewarding and beneficial to everybody involved. All right, so these are the factors you want to look at. I can't go into, like, if I went to every minute detail of every single one of these factors, I could probably talk for days and days and days. It's kind of like the essay of what is everything in game and relationships. But hopefully, by outlining these factors for you and giving you some idea of how they play in, you'll now, as you go forward, be able to understand, as you're getting into relationships, why you're ending up with things the way you want them to be, why you're sometimes ending up with things the way you don't want them to be, and how in your next relationship you can design it from the start to be something that's going to make you happy and be fulfilling, and also be fulfilling to the girl. Okay, so with that said, take these factors, use them. I think they're going to help you massively.